Yeah, let's do this.
A new world order can emerge. A new era. A new world order. A new world order. A new world order.
Screw your freedom.
Ooh. So starting out here, we're coming from the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
So you want to tell us what Kissinger's up to?
Yeah, so Henry Kissinger wrote his, I think, 19th book, and the Wall Street Journal, of course, has to do their part in promoting the 99-year-old's work. And the Wall Street Journal has this headline here: Henry Kissinger is worried about disequilibrium. The 99-year-old former Secretary of State has just published a book on leadership and sees a dangerous lack of strategic purpose in U.S. foreign policy. We won't go through the whole article, but the thing that caught my attention, and I think a lot of people's attention when they looked at this, came to this link here on the Wall Street Journal. There is a big header here where the top of the article, where there's usually an image or something like that. In this occasion, there's a looped video of Henry Kissinger slow-mo putting on his glasses and then taking off his glasses, and just loops over and over again. And it's almost to say, look at my human eyes. Notice how they're not lizardly.
Notice how I'm not a reptilian.
Yeah, very interesting. Not the most flattering thing.
Well, the man is 99, Gon.
Sure, sure, I guess.
The fact that he's even able to take off and put on his own glasses is pretty impressive.
Yeah, so let's go through the article just briefly here. I have some things highlighted to point out here. Again, the headline is Henry Kissinger is worried about disequilibrium on the Wall Street Journal, written by Laura Secor. And it says, at 99 years old, Henry Kissinger has just published his 19th book, Leadership, 6 Studies in World Strategy. It is an analysis of the vision and historical achievements of an idiosyncratic pantheon of post-World War II leaders. It lists some people: Konrad Adenauer, Charles de Gaulle, Richard Nixon, Anwar Sadat, Lee Kuan Yew, and Margaret Thatcher. Quite the list.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a pantheon. It's interesting because we've talked about the sort of construction of, the U.S. government and how the deist, forefathers who founded our country were sort of obsessed with the Greek pantheon specifically. And they really kind of constructed a system of government that does sometimes literally consider its leaders to experience an apotheosis, to join the pantheon of gods. Right. And, they loved it. And it went much further than just like being enthusiasts. They literally created rituals that if you're a good enough American leader, you get to lay in state and go up and take your seat at the throne next to George Washington there. Right.
I'm not going to read. I'm going to skip a few paragraphs down here. It says, block quote, I think that the current period has a great trouble defining a direction. It's very responsive to the emotion of the moment. And the article continues, one never goes long in conversation with Mr. Kissinger without hearing the word purpose, the defining quality of the prophet. Along with another equilibrium, the guiding preoccupation of the statesman.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Again, sort of talking about American politics as if it were not just a religion, but like an actual spiritual mechanism.
It's an agenda.
Or hierarchy.
Yeah. Since the 1950s, when he was a Harvard scholar writing on nuclear strategies, Mr. Kissinger has understood diplomacy as a balancing act among great powers shadowed by the potential for nuclear catastrophe. The apocalyptic potential of modern weapons technology, in his view, makes sustaining an equilibrium of hostile powers, however uneasy it might be, an overriding imperative of international relations. Quote, in my thinking, equilibrium has 2 components, he tells me, quote, a kind of balance of power with an acceptance of the legitimacy of sometimes opposing values, because if you believe that the final outcome of your effort has to be the imposition of your values, then I think equilibrium is not possible. So one level is a sort of absolute equilibrium, End quote. The other level, he says, is, quote, equilibrium of conduct, meaning there are limitations to the exercise of your own capabilities and power in relation to what is needed for the overall equilibrium, end quote. Achieving this combination takes, quote, an almost artistic skill, he says. Quote, it's not very often that statesmen have aimed at it deliberately because power had so many possibilities of being expanded without being disastrous that countries never felt that full obligation. And it goes on. He just talks more about it. He talks about leadership. There's a hint in Leadership of Mr. Kissinger's hope that contemporary American statesmen might absorb the lessons of their predecessors. Quote, I think that the current period has a great trouble defining a direction, he says. He continues, it's very responsive to the emotion of the moment. Americans resist separating the idea of diplomacy from that of, quote, personal relationships with the adversary, end quote. They tend to view negotiations, he tells me, in missionary rather than psychological terms, seeking to convert or condemn their interlocutor. I'm messing up that word.
Interlocutor? Yeah. I'm not looking at it. But
interlocutors,
yes,
rather than the
person you are talking to.
Right. Rather than to penetrate their thinking. Mr. Kissinger sees today's world as verging on a dangerous disequilibrium. And I love this quote here. There was a part that I thought was more provocative that I won't read, but he says, quote, we are at the edge of war with Russia and China on issues which we partly created.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay.
Fun.
You guys partly created it. All right.
Yeah.
We'll go with that. But yeah, there's more in here.
It's funny because it's like, who else would have created it?
Right.
I mean, on one hand, he could be saying, it's partly their fault, partly our fault, et cetera, which, yeah, is just how sort of being a human works.
Yeah. He goes through all the Russia stuff and China.
Sure I'm sure the leaders don't really appreciate Henry Kissinger going against the official line that the war in Russia was unprovoked and Chinese aggression, again, is unprovoked.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me wrap it out here. There's the last part here. It's talking about Ukraine and NATO and all this kind of stuff. And then the author asks the question, if the avoidance of nuclear war is the greatest good, what is owed to small states whose only role in the global equilibrium is to be acted upon by larger ones? That's a really good question. Quote, how to marry our military capacity to our strategic purpose, Mr. Kissinger reflects, and how to relate those to our moral purposes. It's an unsolved problem. End quote. Looking back over his long and often controversial career, however, he is not given to self-criticism. Asked if he has regrets from his years in power, he replies, quote, from a manipulative point of view, I ought to learn a great answer to that question because it's always being asked, end quote. But while he might revisit some minor tactical points, on the whole, he says, quote, I do not torture myself with things we might have done differently, end quote. Yeah. That's how he sleeps at night.
Spoken like a true
psychopath
magician. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I just don't worry about the horrible, awful things that my decisions have resulted in. The deaths of nations, really. And
well, spoken like a true American politician. Really.
True. Yeah. So yeah, that's fun. Little Kissinger and Kissinger. For those of you who may not know him, he's been around for a very long time. I mean, obviously, he's 99 years old. Does that mean he was born in 1923? Holy moly.
Must be.
That's how the math is. I have this clip just as a reminder. This is back when Kissinger met with Trump. I think it was right after Trump got into office. And I just have this one moment here. Let me see if I can play it. I might have some issues with the audio. Let's see.
I'm here at a moment when the opportunity to build a constructive, peaceful world order.
There you go. Yeah, he's there with Trump as an opportunity.
What did he hear?
Let me repeat it. He says he's there. He's the visual here is he's sitting there with Trump doing the photo op, right next to each other, and he says that he's here with the opportunity to build a constructive, peaceful world order, which is very great.
Right.
So he's always talked about the New World Order. This has been his shtick for a long time.
Sure.
But there he is, right with sitting with Trump.
Well, it's crazy to think this guy was of age already fairly influential during the sort of New World Order 1.0,
right?
Post
Yeah,
World War
takeoff.
II.
Post World War II, the restructuring of all the the rise of international institutions, and what some would call the first reset in many ways.
Disequilibrium.
Yeah.
I mean, it has such specific echoes of sort of the Freemasonic / occult / technocratic / all the slashes.
The Georgia Guidestones.
Yes,
the
that's
population
exactly right.
reduction and balance with nature. It's this equilibrium.
Yeah. So the disequilibrium, it's interesting. I would be curious actually to check it. I've never read any of his books.
They're pretty dense. I have a couple in my library, and you try to get through that thing, it's like, oh.
I would be curious to check out this new one and see, how much of the Great Reset, New World Order 2.0 is sort of advocated there.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? If that guy says we're in equilibrium, I believe him.
it.
You can't argue with that.